Yes. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm pleased to see you all joining us today at the WAPPP Virtual Annual Congress Next Level PPP. I hope you had a great interaction during the previous session and that you are ready to join us for an exclusive conversation with women leaders and high-level experts in the PPP industry on how to strengthen gender equality in public-private partnership for users and for professionals. My name is RAHMOUN Fatima Zohra, and I am a member of the Executive Committee and the chair of the Women in PPP chapter of WAPPP, the global home for public-private partnership professionals that has members from more than 60 countries, including PPP units and infrastructure agencies. At the World Association of PPP Units, we are committed to the achievement of the SDGs, and SDG number 5 is an integral part of this commitment. Today, 25% of our members are women, and many of them have actively contributed to growing WAPPP, and we are aiming for a 50-50 balance. Good access to quality and sustainable infrastructure is an essential determinant of people's well-being, and it is essential to foster equal opportunities to improve life equality. Many studies have taught us that there is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. Women around the world have also confirmed their leadership in many areas. They have proven that when given the opportunities, they can rise to the occasion and take the responsibilities. Finally, it has been observed that empowered women empower women. So this panel discussion on how to strengthen gender equality in PPPs for users and professionals will focus on a number of questions related to gender infrastructure. The objective is to exchange on how next level PPP can promote gender equality and how it can be implemented to empower women. It is my great honor to be moderating this session and to be joined by such an esteemed group of panelists. So with no further ado, I now have the great pleasure to introduce our panelists, starting with Sara ALVARADO. Sara is current executive director at the Institute for Sustainable Finance in Canada. Sara is also a co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Infrastructure 4 initiative. She has a 30+ years of investment experience, mainly in infrastructure, having worked at the EIB in Luxembourg, the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and the Manulife and Sun Life in Toronto. We are also joined today by Sedef YAVUZ-NOYAN. Sedef is currently the head of PPP department in the Presidency of the Republic of Turkey, Strategy and Budget. Prior to her current post, Sedef worked as a senior transport specialist in the State Planning Organization and Ministry of Development. Sedef has been at the UNECE Committee on Innovation, Competitiveness, and PPP, and she is also a vice chair of the UNECE PPP Working Group. And last but not least, we are joined by Geoffrey, who heads the PPP program and is past chief of the Cooperation and Partnership section of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. He is the connoisseur of the PPP ecosystem and has a wealth knowledge on PPP. So welcome all of you, and I look forward to engaging you in a lively discussion and debate. I'm going to start with a question for Geoffrey. Government has made reforms over the past decades to enhance women's economic participation as entrepreneurs and employees in the PPP industry, yet they could not close the gender gap. What should policymakers do to identify relevant gender issues and design appropriate policy action? The floor is yours, Geoffrey.
Well, Fatima, thank you so much, and thank you too to WAPPP for giving this very important subject this airing with great experts. Look, the public-private partnership program in UNECE is of long standing, and one of the remarkable features I noticed right from the year dot when it began was the lack of women in our activities. I mean, it was like, you know, meetings of 200, 300, and there was about 3 or 4 women at best in the audience. And I remember a conference in Moscow, huge forum, and there was like 30 speakers, one speaker was a woman. And I remember doing the summing up, and I just said, congratulations that we've got one woman out of the 30 who's actually speaking. And people didn't really take the project. They thought I was joking, but I was actually quite serious. And then came the 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals, gender equality. It suddenly became a really issue. And we held some forums, and one was a debate on People First PPP and the role of women and the importance of women's empowerment in this area. And there was a number of recommendations made at this meeting. And if I can just mention them to you, this is the brief, which is on the website. It's the UNECE brief on women's empowerment in People First public-private partnerships. And their governments were encouraged to prefer in procurement those bidders who, in their corporate policies and in their employment practices, promoted gender equality and women's empowerment. Also in the procurement process, to help women-led companies in the supply chain by favouring them. Governments and private sector were also recommended to help with the training of women and also help with the flexibility of employment so that women could play a better role in the company, and to get better decision-taking roles, higher level roles in the project and in the enterprise. Private sector were also involved in these recommendations. Again, the fifth recommendation was enhancing the role of women at senior decision-taking levels, also promoting a gender perspective in the design of projects, getting women involved in actually conceptualizing the problem, and of course ensuring equal pay for equal work throughout. So basically, these guidelines, I think, are the only ones on public-private partnership. So I think they should be taken seriously, but it's not the final word. There is need to validate it, to bring experts to give their comments as well. Also, these are about recommendations in the project itself, and that's not enough. There's the picture always of the woman, the young girl walking up to get the water from a well, and the thing is, she's doing that because her brother probably is at school. The educational system in many developing countries is favoured for men, not for women. So it's not just the project itself that needs policy coherence. And also it's about implementation as well. It's not just making the recommendations, that's dead easy. It's actually seeing implementation. And in one of the recommendations, one project that was catching our eye was the Geneva public transport system. And we had the chief executive officer making a declaration that she will try and ensure that there would be more women in management roles within the public transport system. And she made a commitment for 20%, which is pretty low actually, but it's still a commitment. And also finally, in the evaluation methodology we just produced, we also have recommendations about women and obviously projects that give more credence to women get better scores. So we're trying to make this implementable as well.
Thank you, Geoffrey. So we know that there were like 5 action points for the public and private sectors to empower women in the PPP, and that they were extended to 7 recommendation points for the governments, for the private sector, and for both the government and private sector. And I'm certain that the UNECE has engaged with public organizations and private companies to maximize the impact from successfully implementing these practices. Thank you, Geoffrey. My next question is for Sara. So given your international experience in PPPs in North America and Europe and your Latin background, could you share with us your perspective on women participation in the workforce? Thank you, Sara. The floor is yours for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Fatima. And first of all, hello from Canada, everyone. Very delighted to be here. I'd like to thank the WAPPP and Fatima Zohra all the way to Morocco for inviting me to speak at this interesting event. Also, great to be here with my distinguished co-panelists, Geoffrey in Geneva and Sedef in Turkey. Amazing what technology can do to have us all together online these days. And you were going to bring up one chart, right, Fatima, on screen?
Yes, I'm trying to. Yes, I'm going to do it right away.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to start, we're going to think about going back to 101. The key drivers of economic development are human capital, i.e. people, financial capital, money, and productivity, technological developments. And I find that we spend a lot of time thinking about the financial capital and the productivity and not paying too much attention to the human capital. So if you're leaving out potential contributors in the human capital pool side of the formula, you're basically leaving money on the table. You could have all these great female contributors, scientists, mathematicians, engineers, finance people that are simply not there. So you're cutting yourself short. So I think your countries could be much more competitive if you expanded the pool to include women. It makes sense to do that. So why are we talking about this in 2021? Well, globally, we have three issues. We have structural issues, i.e., how do we hire? Do we have unconscious biases? Who interviews at those panels when we're hiring? Do you have a female there? The second one is that we have cultural issues. And as Fatima mentioned, I am from Latin America initially. I was born and raised in Nicaragua and have been in Canada for 32 years. But looking at the cultural issues, I can speak for Latin America because that's where I come from. But I know that these issues you can find in many, many jurisdictions, right? Females are to raise the kids, to be at home, or to do what are seen as female careers. So if you think about medicine, engineering, architecture, you name it, right, are socially not acceptable or not promoted. So the third issue is women ourselves. And being a woman, I can tell you, I have been speaking about the topic of confidence. We cut ourselves short sometimes, right? And that cuts our career progression. So continued education, find a sponsor, become more confident. I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do ourselves in addition to programs that could be done on the cultural issues and on the social issues. So I'm going to finalize with the comment on the map. On the map, you see the female labor participation rate around the world. That's a map from the World Bank. And in Canada, we are around 61% female participation rate and increasingly moving into more senior positions. And this is the key, right? You don't want achieve parity. You want females to move to the senior ranks because that's when, that makes a difference. We still have work to do in Canada, but are much more ahead of many other countries. And women here are moving into the senior roles, not as fast as we would want, but when I compare to Latin America, some other countries around the world, I'm glad to see that there's a lot of movement towards the senior ranks. For example, the Minister of Infrastructure, now that we're talking about PPPs, in Canada is a woman. So sad that in 2021, we're still talking about these things, but we are here to discuss what else we can do. So back to you, Fatima.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you very much, Sara. So back to you, Geoffrey. So as a past chief of the cooperation and partnership section at the UNECE for Europe, so what has been the UNECE's approach to women's and girls' empowerment in PPPs, and how successful has this approach been?
What, one of the career things that I did when I joined the UNECE was something called the transition to a market economy. This was when the Berlin Wall fell down and the countries which had been centrally planned became market economies. It took quite a bit of a transition, lots of socio-economic problems, but they were successful. But the initial gap was lack of skills in basic market skills like human resources, accounting, marketing, totally absent in Eastern Europe. So UNECE tried to get some program going, a little bit of policy work here. We held an event in Budapest, I remember, 60 people. It went fine. And then I went into the evening and it was a conference organized by one big company, 500 people there, talking about skills enhancement within the organization. And I realized it's not the government that's going to get the skills going to make the transition to market economies, it's the private sector. They were going to get the staff inside the company, get them trained in the skills that they need, turbocharge the whole process, and that will be what is going to really make the difference. And I think that's what happened. That was what happened. I think likewise in the women's empowerment issue, we should tap into the resolve of the private sector and see they have the resources, the capital skills, the knowledges, the expertise. They've no sort of cultural reasons why they shouldn't enhance women. And that's our aim and adoption of these principles, Fatima, that I mentioned at the beginning, to try and get the private sector incentivized to actually make them work. And that would be certainly what I would say was distinguishing the UNECE program. But it's still not working yet. It's still not, I mentioned the Public Transport Geneva commitment, but we need much more companies seeing that these are important and making the similar commitments and then getting them recognized in a platform. And that takes time, energy, resources, and that hasn't been done yet.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Thank you so much for these clarifications. So now regarding the infrastructure projects, and especially at the operational level of these projects, it is well known that women are playing a limited role in the decision-making process of PPP projects. So, Sedef, as a decision maker and through your experience, how do you think we can enhance the role of women inside companies at a senior decision-making levels, from the design to the operational stage of the delivery of a project? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Fatima. Hello to everybody. It's a great honor for me to be speaking on this session. I would like to thank WAPPP very much. First of all, let's take PPPs as general infrastructure projects. When we say PPPs, yes, it includes a service part too, but they are general infrastructure projects. And during the production and construction of the infrastructure, you need some technical branches like engineering branches that are working on these kind of projects. And women are underrepresented everywhere, but especially in the engineering, science, and math part, they are less represented. So the first problem is with this is the women do not prefer to go to the technical branches during the universities. And this formation is given from the elementary school, and it goes through the secondary school, and then to the high school, and then to the universities. So the first problem is with the education. And why is that? Most of the time, the environment, the families discourage the girls, the women students. They say, what will you do with the home care? How will you be working with so many men? How will you go on the site and leave your home? This is one of the first problems, and the teachers are generally acting like that. And the girls do not have the faith, the belief that they will get good jobs if they go to the technical departments. They do not see many role models, so they do not prefer to go to such kind of departments. So this is one of the first step of the problem. The second step of the problem is when they go to the working arena, for example, they have become engineers and now they are in the companies or in the public, they are not as lucky as their male colleagues to climb up the decision maker steps. Because most of the time, to be honest, the employers think that the women have a main role of home care and they will go on a maternal leave or they will leave for something else. They have the responsibility of the whole home. So they may prefer to employ male people, male colleagues more. So we have to solve these two problems. How can we do that? First of all, by increasing awareness from the elementary school, then through the secondary school, and then through the other steps of the education, so that the women can prefer to go into the technical departments. And the second thing is that they should see the role models, because there are very, very successful women around, but they are not always very visible. So being able to meet the women, the girl students with the role models would be very important. Also, there is the monetary side, especially for the women who do not have the necessary financial tools. The scholarships can be provided in terms of incentivizing them to go into the technical departments. And after going to the working arena in the companies or in the public sector, I believe that there should be quotas. Many people argue whether the quotas really work or not, whether they're fireback, but I think quotas are important. First of all, you have to enforce the equal participation of women, and then maybe you can go back from the quotas after people see that women can do it very well, because I believe that the PPPs need a very good project cycle management. You have to plan it very well, you have to construct it very well, otherwise you will have many problems during operation. So it's a holistic approach, and women can do it very well, I believe. Women have the multitasking skills, and they always see one step further. They have a strategic vision. So what a project cycle necessitates and what women have really get very well together. We just have to show it in a good way, and I'm sure that after we put quotas, we put more people in the decision-making stages, the women will be preferred more by the companies and also by the public, and they won't be prevented back from getting to the high decision levels. And also, what I also think that maybe, especially the private sector, also the public sector, of course, can provide some trainings that will increase the skills of the women and support to the women in terms of, for example, childcare. This is very important, I think, because many women think that they should also take care of their children at the same time, and many people really retain from going through their career lives in a much better way just because of their family life. So support the women in terms of home care, childcare would be very important. So I would like to give an example and wrap this up. There is a very good program in Turkey that I can give it as an example, and it's a very good example of partnership, because we're now talking about public-private partnership. This is a public-private NGO partnership or international organization partnership to incentivize women to be engineers. It's the Turkey's Engineer Girls program, and it has been initialized by Limak Foundation. Limak Foundation is founded by a very big construction company in Turkey that's taking part in PPPs largely, and the CEO is a woman. So at the beginning you said when you empower women, they empower more women, and that's exactly the example of this. She has seen that there are very few women engineers, and then she initiated this program, and they are raising awareness through the high schools. They're raising awareness. They are giving scholarships to the university students. They are giving online English lessons to improve their languages, technology lessons, etc. They're really working very hard. And the third pillar is coordinated by the UNDP, which is also very important. It's the Gender Equality Seal program. They're trying to put a system in the enterprises, and the public and the private enterprises, for inclusiveness of more women. And Limak Investments is the pilot firm for that. So I think this can be a very good example that can be replicated in many of the countries. Government, public, multinational organizations and NGOs can act all together to achieve such kind of a thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sedef. And I do think that the awareness that you've been talking about in the beginning should not just be for girls, but also for boys, because the mindset needs to be changed for both of them. And now at the financial level, the question is for Sara. So knowing that women are often unable to secure financing, so I would like to hear your opinion on how the private sector encourages women-led businesses and women-owned small enterprises. The floor is yours, Sara. You are on mute, Sara.
I hope that wasn't going to come in this session, but Sedef, great comments, and I fully agree that it comes from the educational side. We saw it at the CFA Institute. If we don't have, that balance in the pool when you're hiring, it's very difficult to make that decision, right? And you usually have like the 20-80 when you're looking at the hiring pool. On the financing and development of SMEs, work, and females, you see that, on the government side, the EIB, the European Investment Bank, where I used to work, is doing great programs in Africa for SMEs and for microloans, and including a lot of that is females. The Inter-American Development Bank is doing the same in Latin America for SMEs and for microlending. On the private sector, though, I'm glad you brought it up, because this is super interesting what's going on. There has been an increased level of interest in ESG funds, where the E focuses on reducing GHG emissions, renewable power, hydro, wind, solar, hydrogen, on the technology side, carbon capture and sequestration, and so on. But we have seen also a proliferation and a huge increase in interest in funds that deal with the S part of ESG, the social side. And you have seen a lot of impact funds. So some of them are environmental funds or GHG funds or net zero, whatever you call them, are focused on the E, but there's also an increased amount of attention into impact funds, and be that a focus on females or roles and encouragement and financial aid, for example, or social impact on Indigenous communities, which is very important in Canada, and so on. I think impact funds, the difference between the other funds is that although they expect to see a return, the key driver is the impact and not necessarily the return. I mean, you have to have a return for this to work, but obviously the impact and how you measure that, how programs are implemented, I think that's where private sector, and more than private sector, is investors themselves who want to put their money to work where they can make an impact. So I think that would make a difference. The issue here is the issue of data, right? How do you audit these things? How do you make sure that the money is actually getting to where it says it should be? There's a lot of greenwashing on these funds. So it's all about data reporting, them being able to be audited. But that's very encouraging these days for financing of females. So back to you, Fatima.
Thank you. So as you stated, Sedef, we know that women can do very well with PPPs and all infra. So how can we use PPPs infrastructure for women empowerment?
Well, we can use it twofold, I think. We can use to include more women as stakeholders, and we can also use PPPs to employ more women. So it can be used to two sides. Now, why is it important to include women as stakeholders? As we ease the life of the women, we create healthier and more prosperous societies. If the women are happy, if they can access the basic infrastructure easily, then they are happy, their children are happy, the family is happy, so the society is happy and more prosperous, because if you give the opportunity to women, I know that they can create miracles. I know it from myself, so sorry to say that, but all the women around me, they are really creating miracles. So we have to include more women. And how can we do that as, for example, governments? If a government is saying that it's going to align with the SDGs, and many governments say so, many countries say so, they really have to align with the SDGs. And from the planning phase of the infrastructure or PPP or whatever project it is, it doesn't have to be a PPP, they have to be aligned with the SDGs. And SDGs cover everything. SDGs cover women empowerment, SDGs cover the planet, environment, everything. So if SDGs are taken in priority, if the projects are prioritized according to the SDGs, I believe that women stakeholders can be really included in the project design phase. And if they are included in the project design phase, this will go on, the impacts of this will go on through the whole project cycle. And here I want to salute Geoffrey, because the UNECE has developed a very good evaluation tool. It's still developing, it's improving it. It's an evaluation self-assessment tool of the projects, whether they are aligned with the SDG priorities. And we have tested that tool, and there were very lovely questions in that about women participation. So I think that governments should get inspired from this tool or should use this tool, however they like. But this kind of prioritization, the socioeconomic benefits, prioritizing first the socioeconomic benefits is the most important thing for choosing, for prioritizing a project. This is the first
Sedef,
thing.
10 seconds, please. Sedef.
Okay, then we can employ the women with the PPPs. What makes the difference in PPPs is that the lenders are generally multinational development banks, and they are generally incorporating the ESG rules, and they are asking for women equality. That's the PPPs difference from traditional public procurement. Thank you.
Okay, great. Now, as you can see, this is a really fascinating panel, and these are very interesting answers. Thank you. So now we are going to shift gears and go to actions and solutions that could be proposed to narrow the gender gap and empower women. So back to you again, Sedef. So from the public sector perspective, do you think that public sector needs to provide entry points where gender issues are addressed to narrow the gap between gender in the PPP legal and regulatory framework? And if yes, what do you suggest?
Well, PPP regulatory legal framework is very important, of course, but PPPs comprise only 5 to 10% of all the public procurement. I think those kind of regulations should be done for all kind of public procurement. And I will again go to the back to the initial phase of my speech. I think quotas are important, very important in terms of women employment. There should be a percentage, a quota for the employment in the, for example, SPVs or in any other kind of, the public organizations that are making such kind of projects. And the second thing is, I think Sara has also touched on that, to incorporate the women-led SMEs or companies in the supply chain. That's also very important. Such kind of a quota can also be introduced in the regulations, in the laws that are including all public procurement. Back to you, Fatima.
Thank you. Thank you, Sedef. Regarding young women in the PPP profession, so Sara, how can the private sector contribute to the necessary transfer of skills these women need to become the business leader of the future?
Thank you, Fatima. And again, fascinating conversation. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I find, Canada, as you know, has been a leader in PPPs. And I would say that that achievement would not have been possible without all the senior females that I see. And I was thinking, and I've seen, the legal profession is one where, the senior lawyers tend to be a group of females. And then you have engineers from the engineering firms to the financing side and so on. We have a group that is called Women in Infrastructure, and we have the Canadian and the Toronto chapter, and it is a networking group where the more senior people have the conversations with the more junior ones who are starting their careers, and it is a great group to exchange ideas, challenges, because we all face them, right? One way or another. So it is a great group to be a part of, and we have hundreds now, and they do have recognition for the most senior females and also the upcoming talent. So if people are hiring or looking for talent, there's a huge pool there. I'm also thinking, private sector contributing in Canada. There's a lot of talk about diversity and inclusion. Some jurisdictions are much more ahead on the diversity and inclusion language, including it into policies at organizations and private sector. Where I come from, it's most of my career, largely in PPP and infrastructure. Diversity has taken a lot more ground than inclusion. And diversity, is how many females do you have? But not delving deep into the reasons why so many females are not making it to the senior levels. And I think the answer to that may be in the inclusion part of the D&I. And I was talking to a good friend, Petra de Bruxelles. She leads diversity and inclusion for the IMF. We had the pleasure of working together at the EIB. And she said, you know what? People need to start making more effort to look at the inclusion side of things, right? Are you bringing these younger females into a meeting where the decision is being discussed, even if they're not participating actively and talking, but they see the developments, they hear the conversations, and the learning exercise for them to be able to move up is amazing. So my recommendation is look at the inclusion part of diversity and inclusion. It's difficult to measure because how are you going to say, like, diversity is a fact, right? You have them and it is a number, and you say we have 30% and we're doing great because we're coming from 25. Well, we still have room to go. But inclusion, how do you track that and say, well, I brought so and so to a meeting that was important? I mean, it is very hard, but it is one of the key things that we need to do. And then when I think also about the inclusion is an option. It takes somebody to take action and say, I'm going to bring somebody because that's going to help them. So it is the awareness, right? Building the awareness that this makes a huge difference. And it has made a huge difference in my career. I find when I have been able to progress the fastest is when these wonderful male and female bosses I have had have brought me into the conversation and made me part of the discussion. So for females that are at the start or mid-career, bringing them into meetings, into decision-making, and the learning that has to be continuous learning, continuing education, right? Don't think, okay, I have my career, this is it, and I'm ready to move up in to the senior levels. They have to think about continuing education, the soft skills, and things like that. For young women, my recommendation is build your confidence, right? Don't wait for, yes, the government programs and the corporate programs on the private side are very key and very important, but there's a lot we can do ourselves to build on our confidence, to do continuing education, to build these networking groups that are extremely helpful. So I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara. So in terms of the follow-up of this session, Geoffrey, what in your view would be the most effective way to getting women's empowerment better implemented in infrastructure projects?
Well, I was just looking at the chat and someone said, why is PPP, is this the right place for a gender issue, PPP? And traditional PPP has been certainly looking mainly at financing, but we're trying to go to another level of PPP. We call it people first, and that is consistent with the Sustainable Development Goals. So for us, it's absolutely root and branch right in the heart of what we envisage the new people first PPP model should be, consistent with sustainable development. One thing I should mention, UNECE, the organization I worked 32 years in, has been a paragon of virtue relative to gender equality. It's astonishing. When I arrived, hardly any women. It was mainly technology, transport, energy. Women weren't very well represented in those sectors. There has been a huge change, gender equality. If there's now an opening in the organization, a woman will get the job with the same capacity as a man. There is, and as a result of this, strong desire to put women into senior positions inside the organization. There's not the lack of confidence that can. In fact, many of the women I worked with certainly didn't lack confidence. So I think that's a lesson that we have to learn, that the organization structure can empower women and make women more confident because they've got much more difficulties to try and rise to the top for various other reasons. They've got so much else on their plate. I would like to see something tangible coming out of this meeting, in the sense, because I think we've had a lot of meetings at UNECE. I want to see something actually coming out, and I would love to see something between UNECE and WAPPP, whereby the guidelines and the recommendations are validated and made a little bit better. I think we can actually get some more data involved, and we can come up with maybe a joint platform that could demonstrate nice things that Sedef mentioned about what's going on in Turkey. But I think it would be nice to get a little bit more momentum, and I think it would be nice to get the private sector. I mean, the private sector, the construction industry, it knows, for example, how poorly women are represented in its ranks, and are trying to do something about it. I don't know how well, to be honest, but we need to try and demonstrate these things in the PPP context, which, as I say, I think are everything to do with women's empowerment. So something tangible, something build on the 7 principles, but make them better and make them bring a platform. We've got to give incentives to companies and governments who make a difference. difference. We can't just be silent on that. And that's the way to encourage other people to make a difference.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and I agree with you. We will. I would love to see a work between the WAPP and the UNECE on this subject, and I look forward for that. So we have 2 questions from the audience. The first question: do you think that PPP development, that the development of PPPs in the developing country is really related to a gender issue? And the second one is: do you think that all countries have similar cause of gender disparity? So I'm gonna open the floor to you, Geoffrey, Sara, Sedef, to whom you want to answer the questions.
I can jump on the second one, just because I had the map, right, that I had earlier. And the answer is no, the causes are different, right? So I had mentioned the structural issues, the cultural issues, and then ourselves, right, female ourselves. So if you look at the structural issues, how we hire our females there in the panel, depending on how advanced the country is on diversity and inclusion, the more they may be conscious and say, you know what, we have to have 2 females in the panel that is hiring. And that makes a huge difference, right? Because we tend to be a little bit more modest, not advertise ourselves. And speaking from what I have seen around me, right, during my career. So having females on the panel, and if you're more advanced on diversity and inclusion that way, will make a difference. Secondly, on the cultural issues, right? And I can speak for Latin America because that's where I was born and raised. And it's still that, macho mentality that cultural, doesn't support you to become. My daughter is a mechanical engineer. And I mean, back home, that is for little girl, petite, kind of thin, fragile. No, the brains are amazing, right? And when you have these girls that are very mathematical and can get the work done, it doesn't matter what you look like, right? And those preconceived ideas and cultural issues are very different. So if you go back and look at the map that I brought earlier from the World Bank, you see, the Commonwealth countries are well ahead in terms of female participation. Some of the countries in Africa, but those are agricultural economies, right? So it is understood. I'm not suggesting that they are senior females at top companies, but it's more the nature. So they are very, very different, and they had to be looked at as such.
May I jump?
Thank you, Sara.
May I also jump on the first one?
Yes.
I think the first question is a very good question. Really, are the developing countries taking women as their mandates when they're doing their PPPs? Very good question. Of course, when you think about Maslow's hierarchy, sometimes the developing countries may have other priorities rather than putting the women in the center. But this is all about the raising the awareness of how the women targeting or how the women participation, both as stakeholders and as users and as decision makers, will really make an impact on this economy. I think that the most impact that the women can make are in the developing and less developed countries. So maybe the international organizations like UN, UNECE, and the other international organizations and the multinational development banks that are providing the credit, that are lending the money, should make the governments aware of that. Because if I think that the developing countries understand the impact of the women on the prosperity from the slide that Sara has shown to us, they will put women more into the center of the PPPs, I guess. But that's a very right question. Many of the developing countries don't have women specifically in their agenda.
Thank you, Sedef. Geoffrey, you have anything to add?
Just, I was at a Belt and Road conference a couple of years ago in Beijing, and a presentation on Pakistan, and it was a coal-fired power station. And they were saying, well, Mr. Hamilton will be pleased. The women here are driving the dumper trucks. And you saw photographs of women with the dumper trucks. Fantastic. Everyone thought, well, that's Hamilton happy about that. Well, my boss, the Undersecretary General of the UN, stepped in and said, well, don't be so quick. Mr. Hamilton is terribly sad that the project is a coal-fired power station which is emitting CO2s. And that's the issue. we shouldn't just look this in one dimension. It's the broad capacity of a people first project of which women is a central part, but it's not the only part. We're trying to change the world, make it better, sustainable and more secure for the future. So we have to look at it in this holistic way. And look, developing countries, I think it's, as said, I think it's much more challenging. Women's empowerment is an issue there than it is in Europe and the United States.
Music to my ears, because at the Institute of Sustainable Finance, we're looking at sustainability as a whole. So it's the E, the S, and the G that will make a difference, and it is all interconnected.
Thank you. So on that note, please join me in thanking this fantastic panel. Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Sedef. Thank you, Geoffrey, for this enriching debate on such important subject. And this brings us to the end of this session. I'm pleased by the number of professionals who have joined. We thank you for taking the time to participate, and we also look forward to welcoming you as a member. Please feel free to reach out to us at membership.wapp.org. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.